And when I saw that you talk about big emotions, I was like, it was like the universe like spoke or answered my question, because we have a lot going on in my household and we're doing therapy, and we can unpack all of that later. But I feel like sometimes there's just like a missing step to what we're already trying to work on. And you're agreeing with me. So
I hear that all the time. Yeah.
all the time. So here's a little scenario that I want to share with you. And I haven't really shared fully with everybody, but here we go. I'm just going to share it with everybody that's listening. I have a young child who has special needs. You know, they're more physical than mental, and he's, you know, he's good to go in terms of cognitive stuff, but he's a little bit, we're understanding, emotionally delayed. So we deal with big emotions. So here's the scenario. We're all sitting down to watch The Mandalorian, right? So this is like a little while ago because we're waiting for the new season. And he wants me to pop the popcorn exactly when he wants me to pop it before we start. And he wants to start The Mandalorian. And so I asked him if he can just wait to start The Mandalorian, because I want to see I want to have the full experience, but I'm going to pop the popcorn for him. But then he has an entire meltdown because I popped the popcorn not right exactly when he thinks that I should be popping
exactly
it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden he has this explosive outburst, you know, in the middle of the family room. My husband's frustrated and trying to support me. I'm triggered and pissed off because I just want to watch a show. My oldest, the teenager who I dragged out of his room, is like, I'm over this. I can't stand my little brother anymore. And then the middle is like, sneaks away into his room and goes plays video games, you know, probably unaffected, but probably scarred in some way. Like that we'll find out in therapy when he's 30 years old. So
right,
it's
of
like,
course.
you know, and then it turns into like, you know, sort of like a power struggle. And, you know, then, you know, you're asking them to go to their room to calm down. And it turns into, you know, where you kind of have to like arm wrestle them, you know, even though I'm a hands-off parent, to get him into his room, to calm down, to just get him out of the situation. And there's like hitting and biting, you know, and we're talking about an 8-year-old here. So it's a lot,
It's a lot.
know, and then you as a parent think, what did I do wrong to enhance the situation? Like, how could I have been there in a better way? You know, so let's talk about this, because I know this is your jam.
This is my jam. This is totally my jam.
Cheers, by the way.
So one of the first things to understand, and this is where things went off track that you weren't even aware of. But here's a very basic thing to understand about people with big emotions. And like you said, it's adults too. I am what's called a highly sensitive person. I don't know if either of you are sensitive. Yeah. Okay. There you go. So you know what this is like. For people who feel strongly, which is basically, a lot of people say, well, what does big emotions mean? It just basically means we feel strongly. People who feel strongly have in their mind that things should go a certain way. They imagine the popcorn is going to be popped a certain way. And when it's not popped that way, there's a huge amount of discomfort inside. And what you're seeing in the meltdown is just the release of all of the feelings inside, that things didn't go the way I imagined in my head. Very often, the reason they're so reactive to this is because the world of a big feeling person can be very chaotic and like unpredictable inside. So we want our world to be predictable on the outside. So if the popcorn isn't popped in a certain way, all of a sudden there's chaos inside, and all you're seeing in the meltdown is the symptom of the chaos that they're feeling inside.
Yeah. Okay. That's like, that makes a lot of sense, because it seems like he went from like 0 to like
0 to 6.
Yeah. Well, past 100, like past 60, he went from 0 to like 180, you know, and it was like everything went sideways.
Right. And it was like, he was probably fine before, totally fine. And then you're totally like, what just happened? Totally
fine. And I know I'm not the only one, because I know that, I mean, I do think that my youngest is a little bit of a sensitive as well. Like, I'm very highly sensitive, and that's the other thing. So I should properly introduce you, because you're a parenting specialist. And I kind of spilled the beans a little bit with Carmen earlier. You're highly educated in working with like kids and grownups and families. You've been doing this for a really long time, like 12 years. And I'm just curious. Obviously you have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and you're niching out in big emotions. And so I'm just curious, like, how did you dive into that? Like, how did you niche out in that? Because it feels personal, because if you're highly sensitive, yeah,
it's extremely personal. Okay. So yeah, I've actually been in the field of psychology for 17 years. 12 years ago, to your point, started working with parents, because I was working with kids and teens, some adults, but especially when I was working with kids and teens, I realized that if I worked with parents, I actually had an even bigger impact on the home. So I started working with parents 12 years ago, and I was doing a lot of, discipline, fostering more responsible, behavior, moods, attitudes. But I always just sort of was drawn to helping people who had big emotions, whether it was the kids or the parents raising kids with big emotions. I love working with parents with big emotions who are raising kids with big emotions, because that's my house. I'm raising 2 daughters, both have big emotions.
Oh, wow.
So here's the thing, like, you probably know this as someone who's sensitive. I have like one superpower. I kind of stink at everything else. I stink like I'm not a good cook. I can't sing. I can't draw, but I get big feeling people. And when I work with parents, they're like, whoa, you said something that I've been in therapy for 10 years and no one's ever realized it. It just happens to be the thing I get. I feel it. I sense it. It like flows through me.
Yeah.
So I niched a while ago, and my business just became so much busier, because whenever someone is raising a big feeling child, it's like, oh my gosh, it is I loved your story, not because I want that to happen to you,
Right.
but it's so representative of how one person with big emotions can control the entire family.
And that's like that's a big point, because we're a party of 5. And I know Carmen is too. We're a party of 5. And that's a lot of people to manage. And when you have a highly sensitive grown up, and then you have a big emotional kid, and then you add in all the other people's thoughts,
Right.
feelings, and emotions that are just regular, or maybe I have a husband that has like big, he's got big emotions too.
Mhm.
And it's hard to deal with and handle. And like I said, we are all in talk therapy. The majority of us have either tried it, or the 3 of us are for sure in it. My husband's currently in therapy, talk therapy, finally, because there was like that resistance.
Mhm.
And then I've been in therapy because of my youngest, after putting him in therapy. And it's helpful. It's definitely helpful, but it almost feels like you're putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
Yeah.
Seriously, like it does. And not, there's nothing against our therapists. Like, I love them. They're doing a great job at helping us from one perspective, but it feels like, there's a piece to the puzzle that is just missing.
I
Yeah.
feel the same way.
You?
Yeah, I felt like that forever, and I've tried to read books. Like, how do I answer these questions as they come at me so fast? When the big emotions happen, I'm not expecting it, but I'm like blown away. And what I do is a lot of listening, and I don't know how to respond. And I kind of acknowledge it and then try and work through it. But it's like a Band-Aid on like a volcano.
Yeah.
Right.
And it seems like I'm either not saying the right thing, or I'm saying the wrong thing. It feels like there's another piece to the puzzle that I'm like, where is it?
Yeah.
I know,
When
right?
is it
What
going to
am I
enter
missing?
my life? Yeah, like, how old do I have to be to get it? Or what do I have to do to
Yeah.
get it?
Yeah.
And so that's the other part of it too, is that and you talk about this in your podcast, because you also have a podcast as well.
Mhm.
And I mean, okay, so let's unpack this. When you're what Carmen is saying, like you're in this moment, like
Mhm.
you don't really expect it to happen, but you've been through it before.
Mhm.
And so it's not new, but it's unexpected because it comes out of the blue. Like it goes sideways 180, like so
Yes.
quickly. And then either you're like what Carmen is saying, you're kind of like, like
Yeah, it's like shock.
shocked. Yeah. Like you're almost paralyzed. At least you're listening though. Sometimes I don't listen. My ears just go, whoop, and I'm just like in survival mode. And
You
it's
are.
like, you talk about that fight or flight. So let's talk about that a little bit, because
Yeah.
that really resonated with me when I came across your podcast.
Yeah. And this is really important in understanding. If you're raising a big emotion child, you really do need to understand this. So basically what happens is, when someone feels any type of discomfort, I actually have a word I use. I'm known as the Yuck Lady, because I call this yuck. Whenever there's any type of yuck could be that someone's hungry, tired, overwhelmed, feeling like the popcorn was made wrong. It doesn't matter what it is, anything uncomfortable. What happens is our brain senses discomfort as a threat. So it turns on an alarm, and that alarm is the fight or flight response.
Okay.
One of the first things our fight or flight response does is it shuts off the part of the brain that is rational. It shuts off the part of the brain that can process language. It shuts off the part of the brain that can regulate emotions. So that's why when we talk to our children logically, when they're in yuck, it does not work because they can't process that. What happens is when they're in yuck, and this is especially true of big feeling children, but all children, they only sense energy, because the fight or flight response is literally like scanning the environment saying, am I safe? Can I get out of fight or flight? And often what we do as parents is we go into fight or flight, we go into yuck because of our kids' big emotions, and then our energy is no longer safe to our kids. So I call this the cycle of yuck. They go into yuck, their behavior that's a symptom of their yuck puts us into yuck. Our yuck behavior puts them into yuck, and we get stuck in this cycle.
Yep, totally.
Yeah. And so we have to kind of, that's the first place I always start with everybody, is just understanding this concept of yuck, and that the behavior you see, let me actually tell you this really quickly, because you'll start to see this in your kids. There are basically three types of behaviors you see when someone's in yuck. One is where they're turning their yuck out. So this is the kids who are melting down, who are being disrespectful. Like you say, do you need help with your homework? And they say, oh, you're so annoying, leave me alone. Like
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yep. Check.
That's yuck turned out. Yuck turned out is blame. Adults do this too. Like they're in yuck and you say, why didn't you take out the trash? Oh, well, you should have told me earlier. That's yuck turned out. So that's the first part, is yuck turned out. So if you see these symptoms, these behaviors, they're only symptoms of yuck. Second type of yuck behavior is yuck turned in. This is where you hear kids saying, you don't like me. You like my brother or sister better. Why do you spend more time with them? Why am I the only one that gets in trouble? That's their yuck turned in. This is also anxiety is yuck turned in, low motivation, all that's yuck turned in. And then what eventually happens, the third cluster of behaviors you see when someone's in yuck, is they start to, at about age 7 or 8, this starts to happen. And adults, we do this all the time, is we numb our yuck. So we either numb through devices, through sugar. Teenagers, I used to be a teenager therapist for teens, lots of pot smoking. They were numbing their yuck. So it's really, when we see these behaviors, they're symptoms. The behaviors put us into yuck.
Yes.
Our response, our yuck turned out, puts them into yuck, and you get in this cycle of yuck.
How do we get out of yuck?
Good question.
I'm like, how do we get me out of the yuck?
Yeah.
I need to get out.
So here's the thing. It's hard to get out of it once you're in it. It's better to not go in it to begin with, but it's possible to get out of it. But here's the problem, is that you'll relate to this. Once you're in it and you try to get out of it, your fight or flight response is very strong. That's why we're here. Our ancestors had a really good fight or flight response. They survived, reproduced, and we're here. So it's really hard. So if you say to your brain, I'm safe, I'm okay, your brain's going to say, no, you're not. Because if you don't deal with this popcorn incident right now, your child's going to learn that they can get away with it. Like your fight or flight response will convince you that this is a huge deal and that you need to yell. So it's hard once you're in it. What I do for parents of children with big feelings is I actually say, let's try not to get it into it to begin with. And here's the basic premise of not getting into it. What puts us in yuck is when we sense a threat.
Okay.
That's basically yuck, is we sense a threat. When, again, it's a discomfort, we see something bad. If we see our kids' big reactions as a threat, we're going to go into yuck and start the cycle of yuck. If we stop seeing big emotions as a threat, which is what I help all parents I work with do, because you really can stop seeing it as a threat, you don't get triggered by it. And then what happens is your energy is energy that helps your child get out of it faster.
Okay. So how do you do that though? Because a lot of times, like if I'm not in fight or flight or paralyzed, in the moment, I am like in this like weird mode. I call it like my go mode, where I'm like, I'm idle, like I'm idling. So like I am pulling in all of my energy just to like not combust and not like rage, because in my head, I'm thinking, shut up, or I'm like, stop being an asshole. And we can, like, let's be real about it. Because sometimes in your head, you're kind of like, why is my kid acting like this? And like, why is he freaking out over me making the popcorn 10 seconds, 10 seconds before he really wanted it done? And like, can he understand that I would like to sit down and see the entire folks experience of the entire show as a family? Why do I have to sit back and make you popcorn and wait and miss out? And then he's probably thinking like, what, what is he thinking? Is he thinking like, I'm not hearing him, or what? Like, I don't know.
Oh, I love that. So you actually, you just said what's going on in your mind that's making you, by the way, what you're doing is you're going into freeze. You've probably heard that fight or flight, since we were all in school, it's been upgraded. It's fight, flight, freeze. And they actually added a fourth, which is fawn. There's a whole other part of our fight or flight response. What? So it's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You go into freeze. which is
Right.
very common.
Okay.
So you're already in freeze mode. You're already in fight or flight or flight or freeze.
Okay.
So you answered it yourself. What happens is we tell ourselves a story about our child's behavior. The story is basically how we interpret behavior. So behavior in itself, objectively, is not good or bad. We tell ourselves that it's good or bad. And what's really interesting about our brains is that our brain doesn't know if something's a threat unless we tell it. It has no idea.
Okay.
So one person could see a meltdown and say, oh my gosh, why is he doing that? I just want to watch the movie. Like, I just want to sit down. What you've just told your brain is that there's a threat, you go into fight or flight.
Okay.
Another person could say, of course they're melting down, because I understand with big emotions, if things don't go his way, he's going to feel a lot of energy inside. And it's not a threat. I just need to help him through this. And if I don't get triggered, I'm going to help him through it much faster. This is where I get families too, where they seriously just don't get triggered anymore.
I would love that, because I honestly will tell you, like, I can get there because I do understand, like, he's having like a moment and I can remain calm myself. But then, like, what do you do, like, to not let it affect the entire family?
It's a great question.
I mean, seriously, because then I got my husband, he's stressing
Yeah.
out because he's like, thinks he needs to help me. And then he can't help me. And then I've got my teenager freaking out and like kind of coming at me and saying like, hey, like, you're not dealing with him appropriately. And then it's like, I always tell my boys, I'm like, if somebody's in trouble, especially like at school, like, don't get involved, because then the target of the, like, the red zone is going to be on them instead of on like where it was originating from, and so it's like, it feels like I'm just getting hit from all sides.
And you are, in a way. So
Yeah.
one of the things I always say, because I have a program helping parents of kids with big emotions.
I know.
And the third part of the program is exactly what you're saying, which is let's get the family involved. Because I think most people who help families with kids with big emotions miss the boat and don't talk about the entire family.
Right.
So what I do is pretty early on, everybody in your family, all 5 members, should understand this concept of yuck and what happens when someone is on what I call the yuck curve, which is the yuck curve represents when someone's actually in yuck. It's like a rainbow shaped curve that the curve gets bigger and bigger and bigger, reaches a peak. That's when the yuck behavior is the worst.
Yeah.
And then eventually it comes down.
Okay.
That's when they can re-access that part of the brain that is rational and all that stuff. Everybody needs to understand yuck and the yuck curve. And every child needs to understand their siblings so that they don't become resentful. So what I actually do is I have families start to think about, how does someone else's yuck affect me? And what do I need when someone else is in yuck? So when my brother's in yuck, I create what I call when then statements. When my brother's in yuck, then I will blank. And I would help all 5 family members actually decide what action to take when they're seeing the yuck around them.
Yeah.
So they start to understand it differently. So it's no longer a threat. They don't
Right.
need to get involved because they don't see it as a threat anymore. And they know what they need and what they can do. And then there's less resentment because they're
Right.
like, oh, my brother's in yuck. I know exactly what to do about this. I know what I need. I know it's in my control. I'm going to go do it.
It seems like at that point, then you can, instead of just surviving each day, you can thrive. And that's what I'm trying to get through to my family is like, we're not the goal isn't to survive, it's to thrive. So
Yes.
figuring out how each of us gets through the yuck, that sounds like
Exactly.
thriving instead of just surviving.
That's such a good point, because here's the thing, yuck controls human beings if we allow it to. If you really think, and maybe I'm biased because I teach about this for a living, but if you think if people actually knew how to handle their yuck, how much would the world be different?
Ugh,
How much
so
less
better.
anger and hurt? And it's so much of the world is yuck turned out. So
Yeah.
I agree with you so much, Carmen, that when we understand how to handle our yuck, we are less resentful of other people when we understand what they're going through. And then we know what we know our role in it. And it really does allow a family. I love that you said it allows them to thrive, because then they get through challenging situations together as like a 5-some, rather than what usually happens, which is everyone either silos or attacks.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
I
if you
get
could
that
do
a
it in the
lot.
home, if you can start learning how to do it in the home, then
Totally.
think about how much farther ahead you are when you're in the workplace or in school giving a speech and you forget your lines and you feel uncomfortable or whatever it is. It just seems
Exactly.
like you'd be like it's all right. You know?
That's exactly right. What happens is you learn to handle challenges. So I teach resilience, obviously, because I'm working with kids with big emotions.
Yeah.
That's what I teach. Resilience doesn't come from not being uncomfortable. Resilience comes from, to your point, being in front of the class and forgetting your lines. That's uncomfortable. Do you know how to handle it? You do. So you can handle challenges without it creating more yuck inside of you. What ultimately happens is we don't know how to deal with yuck. So the yuck grows inside of us. There's more anger, there's more anxiety, there's more depression, because all that is a big pile of yuck that no one knew how to deal with.
Right. That's interesting that you're saying that. And so like, okay, so if there's other people out there, like what would be like one tip to like kind of work on that, like with teaching your kid resilience, like just like maybe a couple tips, because I know you have an entire program, but I'm like, sign me up.
Sign
Like
me up. Yeah.
yesterday, maybe like a year ago.
Let's do it together.
I know, right? We totally can.
It is really powerful when you read what people say when they first start, because I have people basically say, where are you now? And then when they're done, it's like night and day. I love having people read where they were, because it's a 4-month program. You read where you were 4 months ago. It's crazy the difference. It really is.
I can
All
imagine.
the learning. Yeah.
The learning and the practicing. It's actually a very practical program. I don't want to talk about it too much, but
Yeah.
I actually have people use the tools and scenarios they face. So they learn how to handle like when your child freaks out because of popcorn. Like I have them go through scenarios. But anyway.
No, yeah,
so
no.
yes.
What's a couple tricks like, or what's a couple tips that, that you would work with parents or kids, or both, in terms of like teaching resilience, maybe starting with the parent, because, we're the parents.
Yes. So I'm going to actually give you the 2 steps of resilience, the way I teach them.
Okay.
Number 1 is we have to be aware of our emotions and respect our emotions. We have to just be aware. This is sort of what I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling out of control. We don't even have to know specifically what it is, but we have to know we're feeling some sort of discomfort.
Okay.
And then we have to know what action to take.
Okay.
Because what happens is we feel yuck. And again, we turn our yuck out, we turn it in, and yuck is going to happen. We're going to feel out of control. It's just, can we recognize that we're in it and do something that releases the energy in a healthier way?
Yeah.
So we're not being nasty to our parents or to our kids, that we're saying, I recognize this and I know how to handle it so that I can travel the yuck curve. That's what I call it when you go through the fight or flight response. Travel it in a healthy way, release all this energy in a healthy way, and then I can re-access the part of the brain where my values live and where my emotional regulation lives. How do we travel the curve without doing damage? That's a big part of resilience. Most of us want to stop when we're feeling uncomfortable. We want that feeling to go away. And all that happens is we push the yuck further down. We need to know how to.
This is reminding me of Candyland. In Candyland, where you get to the point where there's like the sticky gummy stuff that you get stuck in.
Yes,
and then
the pits.
you just, and then you don't make it to the end for whatever reason. I love it. It feels like this would be the whole.
Yeah, totally. Because you have to travel the curve. If you don't travel the curve, it actually leads to really bad things later. It's yuck inside. And then for parents, this is what happens. We don't travel our yuck curve and we become burnt out. Burnout
and
is
then there's drinking, and then there's, numbing.
Yep. Burnout is not completing the yuck curve over and over and over. It's stress after stress after stress, not addressing our stress, and then we become burnt out. So if we allow ourselves to travel the curve and release it, and if we allow our kids to travel the curve and release it, we don't build up yuck inside.
Beautiful.
But most of us don't do this.
Emotions are good, right? We're not saying that they're bad in any way, because I have my big emotion son is like, I will just push my feelings down right now then. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Is just,
we don't want them to control us. That's the key. That's what resilience is.
Okay.
We have them. We don't want them to control us. So we have to recognize them and say, they don't control me. I choose what to do now. It doesn't tell me what to do. So if I'm feeling frustrated, my frustration doesn't control me so that I'm mean to my mom. I'm feeling frustrated and I know how to deal with this energy inside. I know what to do right now.
Yes.
And that allows me to travel the curve so that the energy doesn't get stuck inside of me and it doesn't get stored up as negative behavior later.
Yeah, I do not want that negative energy stuck inside my kids. And I have to tell you,